Hey there, treacle tarts. Thank you for coming and joining me for this video on my channel. It's quite early in the morning here in the UK. I've actually been up for ages at the time of starting to film this, probably about 2.5 hours. But now it's at that time where the sun has risen and I'm starting to hear the wood pigeons. And I have several of my windows open, so you might also have the great fortune to hear some wood pigeons. I know a lot of people find their particular call annoying, but I find it really magical. It reminds me of a specific time in my past where I would often get to have time alone with my mum before school. So my stepdad had left for work, good riddance, and my mum became kind of a different sort of personality when my stepdad was away from the home. And that was about the same sort of time that I heard the wood pigeons and we started getting ready for school. Little bit bittersweet because I never enjoyed school that much, really. There were certain parts of it that I enjoyed, which seemed to be the same parts of it that a lot of people who watch my channel enjoyed, like stationery for school, for example, and certain classes, like maybe art class. Or maybe when it was raining outside and you got to sit indoors and just read or do puzzles instead of going out into the playground, which for a lot of people that watch my channel was a form of psychological warfare. We weren't exactly the popular kids in a lot of cases. So it was kind of bittersweet, the sound of the wood pigeons, but I did get to have just that little bit of morning time with my mum and I kind of liked that part of it. So, and it reminds me of where I grew up as well. Wood pigeons remind me of where I grew up. So it was a very beautiful part of the country. So I can say that for it. So I'm sitting here with my coffee. No notes. There are no notes for this video, which is highly unusual for me. The only thing I've got to remember to put in is it's high time I did my Skillshare sponsorship for the month. Thank you, Skillshare, for sponsoring this video. I'm going to get into Skillshare and what it provides you with a little bit later on. I know some of you are familiar now with hearing about my relationship with Skillshare and the classes that I'm using, but I will definitely go into it a bit later on because I want as many of you guys as possible to get a Skillshare trial. I really love Skillshare. But other than that, there are no notes for this video. I feel a little bit naked. This is very weird for me. There were a few different videos I thought about making, and then I suddenly just thought, you know what, just riff about the craft. You've been thinking a lot recently about just how much you love witchhood, how much you love your altar spaces, how much you love the work that you're doing, the rituals that you've been doing, your journey with the craft, you know. Just talk about that and just riff on that. So hopefully this will be okay. As you can tell already, it's a little bit more wayward than usual in terms of direction, but I think that's okay. You know what? Those who resonate with it will resonate with it and take something from it. So I've started another writing project, darlings, and it is, again, about witchcraft. A bit of a different vibe with this one. I think I'm getting much more personal in this one, and I'm talking about how witchcraft can save your life and help you survive some of the most difficult things you will go through in the human experience. And I think that's probably what's led me to think about how valuable the craft has been for me, just how much it has saved me, enhanced me, empowered me, inspired me, liberated me. And that's been a really beautiful journey for me to go on. And if it's been a while since you've personally come to this exploration and confirmed for yourself in your heart what witchcraft means to you, now might be as good a time as any to do that. For a lot of witches, the craft started as a form of play. So we were attracted initially to witches in stories, witches in books and films, and we would play at being witches. We would play at doing spells, casting spells on people and having magical powers and things like that. And that was how it very much started for me. I was always particularly fascinated by witches. I was always rooting for witches. I always wanted the powers they had. I always felt like I resonated with the idea of magic and the idea of making things happen with the mind and with the will. I loved their outfits more, to be honest, and their whole attitude, and just they seemed to have so much more sovereignty and power and determination. And I just felt attracted to them, whether they were good witches or bad witches. But to be honest with you, the get up and the general vibe of the bad witches really did it for me. So I often would pretend to be Jardis, the White Witch from the Narnia Chronicles, or I would do impressions of the Wicked Witch of the West from The Wizard of Oz. I later came to think that Glinda, the Good Witch of the North, was just as awesome. But when I was really young, you know, I would do full-on impressions of the Wicked Witch and the Wizard of Oz. And I mean, I had the long witchy Halloween fingers. I had the the sand timer and the mortar and pestle, everything you needed to do a really good impression of her, I had. And I've dressed up as her a couple of times for parties when I got older as well, with the green makeup and the prosthetic nose and stuff. So it started as a form of play. I don't think that, sort of downplays at all how potent the archetype was and how potent the idea of the craft was, because for me, witchcraft is still about play. And that's something I've really enjoyed to keep as a part of my craft, is that it is about play. It is about joy. It is about feeling uplifted. It is about having a good time. And anything that I tried to include in my craft over the course of time that didn't feel playful in some sense or joyful in some sense, a lot of that was kind of scrapped. So, even though I use witchcraft to sort out a lot of my problems and deal with a lot of my shadows and bring a lot of healing work to the altar that needs to be done, there are, often very joyful threads running through that. Like I listen to music to instigate healing. I write very beautiful and powerful stories that center me and have lots of beautiful, weird and wonderful characters in them. I do that as a part of integrating knowledge about myself and implementing healing. So there are so many joyful things I do. And even just the way I dress as a witch and the power jewelry that I wear, the way that I do my altar, the way that I keep my Book of Shadows and Book of Mirrors, these things provide me with joy. So a lot of it is joyful, a lot of it is play. And I think there can be a great deal of power in that. I wanted to say, though, that I think it's really important for a witch like me, who often mentions how young she came to the craft, to really put forward that it doesn't matter if you never had any witchy inclinations when you were a kid. It really doesn't matter if when you were young, you were very invested in the church, for example, or you just never thought about religion and spirituality. It wasn't really a part of your paradigm as a child. That doesn't make you any less of a witch if you've come to it now and you never really considered it then, or it wasn't attractive to you then, or even you were really scared of witchcraft when you were growing up. None of those things make you any less of a witch. So when I'm talking about my personal journey, I'm not trying to say, doesn't this prove how much of a witch I am, that I came to it so young and I was playing at being a witch so young and I did my first rituals when I was a little kid? I don't think that really gives me any sense of superiority, or shouldn't give me any position of superiority over witches who came to the craft in all kinds of ways. You could really dance up to the craft in a very sideways manner at a ripe old age, and it really wouldn't make you any less of a witch. I truly believe that. But for me, it was something that, evidently I was very attracted to young. I think witch as an archetype and witch as a verb, that was attractive to me from the get-go, basically. Let me take a sip of my morning coffee, darlings. I'm going to London today to meet up with a friend of mine who's also a witch, and we're going to go look at some art and have some cocktails. So I need to be awake and in the zone. Okay, so I want to talk about the blurred line. I've been thinking about this quite a bit because I started playing at being a witch, dressing up as a witch, doing impressions of witches, and very much like sort of gathering objects together to do spells and rituals and things like that. I think the line for me is quite blurred between when I was playing at witching and when I was actually witching. And I think it's appropriate that that line is blurred because, as I mentioned before, I think there's a lot of power in play. I do remember that there was this point where I did my first spell. I can't remember whether I was 12 or 13, but I was definitely one of those ages. And I was having a sleepover, and it was me and two other girls of the same age. And we did a spell together, and we also did some divination together. We did the wax pouring together, where you pour the wax in the water and then you look at the shapes that have been created. And I think that is my earliest memory of really owning the word in the sense that I was actually doing what the word meant, kind of thing. And it felt very serious and very powerful and very real. And I remember being enchanted by that experience for a few days afterwards, and it really stayed on my skin and it locked into my heart. But as a lot of you will know, those of you who've watched the channel for a while anyway, and have sort of heard bits and pieces of my story, it definitely wasn't a straight line from, I was obsessed with witches and I was playing at being a witch, then I did some spells and then I was a witch and then I moved on from there and it just developed from there. I definitely hopped on the witchy train and off again a lot through the years. I had some really crappy, difficult experiences growing up, and my adolescence was marred by feelings of powerlessness, fear, confusion, alienation, and just this sense that I was grappling with things a lot of the time very much on my own, and I couldn't fully access the resources that I now see looking back in hindsight that I needed. And I think, you know, my instinct was to utilize the craft and to own my feeling that I was a witch and to really go into that because it was helpful to me and it was empowering for me and it made me feel better. But I also had these very deep feelings that nothing could help and nothing was going to get better and nothing was going to free me from the difficulties I was experiencing, both in the external realm around me and also internally, with my mental health and emotional well-being issues. So I think I was going through this fight with myself about how much witchcraft could actually be useful and how much I could get from the processes that the craft entailed. I definitely was interested in reading about it. I definitely bought a few books on it in my early teens with money I got from my first job, which was waiting tables at a 4-star hotel. And even before that, you know, if I had money from like birthdays or whatever, I definitely picked up things that were in that vein. I can't remember the first witchy books I bought, but I remember buying Wicca by Vivian Crowley pretty early in the game and not really understanding a great deal of it. So I know I was definitely still quite young. I actually just like the vibe of having a witchy book like that, a thick witchy book with diagrams and sort of really meaty descriptions and information in it. And I remember doing a lot of like highlighting and writing random words as though I was giving myself the feeling of annotating this book, but really, you know, I was too young to be annotating the book. And I also was given my first deck of tarot cards by a family friend. And again, I was too young at the age of like 12 or 13. I was too young to actually start to learn them. And it was the Marseille Tarot, so it wasn't exactly user-friendly for a young English girl. But you know, I played with them and I felt something from them. And it was like I had this deep instinct that I was going in that direction. But, you know, as I sort of came into being 14, being 15, that was the first point at which I think I really broke from witchcraft. I remember having a very strong push towards the craft at that sort of time in my teens. In fact, there's a photograph of me somewhere in the woods with some other girls with a fire behind us, and we definitely did some witchcraft that night. And it was, I remember exactly the woods it was in and whereabouts it was and how I felt. And I'm dressed like a total goth. But I remember at around that sort of time was when I had this really big, strong push into it because it was helpful and empowering and it made me feel effervescent, but then also this break from it. And I remember by the time I was like 17, I had no interest in anything spiritual anymore. It was, you know, I wasn't thinking of myself as a spiritual person. You could say that some of the things I was interested in certainly were spiritual in nature. Like I was very politically active at that time and I was very interested in certain types of music that were definitely making me feel something and definitely having an alchemical effect on me. But would I say that that was spiritual at the time? No, I would have said I'm an atheist, you know. Would I have used the word atheist actually? I don't know. But certainly I would not have said that I was spiritual or that I was pursuing anything in that vein. So I definitely had some back and forth. I think that when I was in my very early 20s, I was interested again in the craft and then I fell off the wagon again. Then I got on again and I fell off again. And I had several journeys there with like owning the word. I'd love to know down below if anybody feels like sharing with me what your journey with the word witch has been. Has it always been a straight line? You know, do you struggle to fully own the word now? Because I definitely had a lot of little bits on the timeline where I was like, I'm owning it, I am it, I'm living it, and then I'm not, I'm pulling away from it. I'm not sure, you know, it's not for me. And I think there was so much going on in my life at that time that I didn't know what I really wanted to commit to either when it came to any kind of regular spiritual practice or any kind of commitments, even with mindset, let alone with praxis, but just with mindset. You know, there was so much going on. I don't know if I wanted to commit myself to something that obviously deep down I took seriously and I thought was important. And so it was almost like, do you want to marry this thing or not? Because if you don't want to marry it, don't marry it, because when you marry it, it's a commitment. I think deep down, that's how I felt, even if I didn't voice that for myself at the time. I believe, and I have always believed, that I had an instinct that witchcraft helped me. I knew from those very early experiences that it provided me with a sacred escape. So not just an escape to nowhere, but an escape to the most potent parts of my beingness and the most excited parts of me that really believed in life and that were excited by being in the world, you know. I knew that I was a better class of person whenever I was engaging with the ideas that witchcraft presented me with, quite aside from whether or not I was practicing it. Even just thinking about it made me feel like I was, what's the word? I had a sense of worthiness. I don't think I would have thought of it like that at the time, but in my heart somewhere, when I look back now, I know that even in the very early play of being a witch, I had a sense of worthiness. And this might have come from different places. I think I definitely had a deep instinct that I could take control, that I could use my power, and that I wanted to have a certain relationship with myself, with others, and with the world around me, and with all that I could not see, but which I felt was there through the things that witches seem to do, which was to get things and put them together in a way that held meaning and symbolism. You know, for example, right, to create certain formulas that meant that certain things would happen. All of that resonated with me deeply, and I knew that I was connecting with something very important and very positive when I was allowing myself even small slices of that on my life journey. With the writing project that I'm doing at the moment, I am engaging with my origin story, my witchcraft origin story, and I think it's really powerful for people to do that. I recently did a live stream with my Pop-Tarts on Patreon, and it was called Weave Your Spiritual Story. And if you are a Pop-Tart and you haven't seen that yet, I definitely recommend watching the playback. And if you're not a patron and you would like to be, you can get access to all of the workshops that I've done for my Pop-Tarts on playback, so you can follow through and actually sort of, go through the exercises. With the workshop about weaving your spiritual story, I asked a bunch of questions about your origins, basically. Like, what did you learn spiritually when you were very young? When was the first time you deviated from those teachings? What were the first things that you feel were spiritually potent for you? We go into spiritual slumps and crises. We go into all kinds of things like that, so you can map out your personal spiritual journey, the terrain of it, basically. I think that's really useful to do, and I am doing that in this latest writing project that I have on the go. And when I'm writing about the earliest experiences I have of witching and being engaged with the idea of a witch and everything it meant to be a witch, I do write about my Irish Catholic upbringing. I write about going to mass with my nana, being very interested in church and in rosaries and in the Holy Mother and genuflecting and praying and lighting candles and all that jazz in church. I think that's definitely a part of my story too. I saw something sort of come over my nana when she was in church. You know, as soon as she walked through the doors and she kneels to the cross and would do the testicle spectacles vibes, I saw that was having a very alchemical and potent effect on her. No, I did not take Catholicism to my heart as my faith, but I definitely took some of the good stuff and ran, as I've mentioned on the channel before. And I definitely recognised that there were elements to what she was doing and elements to what was happening in church that I wanted to replicate in some form in my own practice. And some of those things I've taken directly from the Catholic tradition, like I do work with rosaries and I do use prayers from the Catholic tradition. I do work with the Holy Mother and with various saints. But there are other things that I just took and I morphed and I alchemized. So for example, I really love the aesthetics in church, and I've tried to take that and do it in my own way on my altar. And I really enjoy repetition, the repetition in prayers and in mass. And I've put that in my own spell writing technique and in my own devotional poetry as well. So I certainly think there are things I took wholesale and there are things that I took and kind of messed with and made my own. And that's also another thing about me when I was young, is looking at somebody else and how they were obviously potently affected by practice, regular, dedicated and committed practice to something that was about connecting to the beyond, connecting to the non-physical, connecting to the divine within and without. And that had a very deep impression on me. And that impression that it had on me will last, I'm sure, my whole life long. Honey bunnies, I think I've reached the appropriate time to let you know that this video is sponsored by Skillshare, and it's an online learning platform. It's particularly good for creatives. I think it's particularly good for somebody like me who's interested in lifestyle and productivity content, wellness content, but also I'm really interested in art. I'm interested interested in journaling. I'm interested in social media, filmmaking, business, and all of those things are topics and themes you can find a lot of content on when you go on to Skillshare. I wanted to mention a specific course that I've really enjoyed over the past month. It's called Storytelling for Leaders by Keith Yamashita, and it helps you to understand how to craft stories that matter. Obviously, in this video, I'm talking about my story, albeit in a very impromptu fashion, but I really enjoy anything that helps us to understand more about how stories work and how they can be the most potent and beneficial. Keith talks about figuring out what your story is, how to craft a great story. He goes into archetypes. So I know a lot of you are going to enjoy that particular course because we are all archetype mad over here, are we not? If you would like to try out a free trial with Skillshare, I couldn't recommend it enough. If you're one of the first 1,000 people to click the link in the description below this video, then you will be able to get your free trial. I highly recommend it, darlings. I couldn't recommend it enough. Lately, I've been thinking about the word witch and how I think of it as a verb. I think of it as an adjective. I think of the energy of witch as being something that I can even just sit in and sit with. And even if I'm not necessarily taking action, even if there's no praxis happening in that moment, it's a word that is in the core of me that I return to when I'm lost. And I think all of the parts of my story where I was going on the witchcraft gravy train and off it again, on again and off it again, the reasons I returned to it were all to do with power and strength. I was looking for power and strength, and I was looking for certainty, I think, also during times of confusion, pain, loss, emptiness, feelings that I didn't know which way was up, you know, either because of things that had happened in my life that were very discombobulating or painful, or because of my mental health issues, which I've struggled with for years. So I always wanted to go back to the craft for that reason. I felt strengthened and empowered by witchcraft. And I felt like it was something that called to me very, very intrinsically in a way that I couldn't deny. And I've always had these feelings for as long as I can remember. I've always had these feelings and these experiences that have involved linking with something that is bigger than me, but also involves me, you know, unquestionably involves me. So it's almost like feeling that I'm in the big river of consciousness and cosmos, but also recognizing the shape of myself as a drop in that river and as a piece of that river that is not divorced from that river, but actually is part of what helps it to flow and helps it to be. And every time I've had those feelings, you know, in whatever way, maybe I was walking through the forest and I felt that feeling of being connected to the divine and being divine. Maybe it was at the end of a great conversation. Maybe it was after I had, been with somebody romantically that meant a lot to me and we connected like that. It could be for all kinds of reasons. It could even be that I really wanted to harm myself or off myself even, but something reached out and grabbed me in the dark and made me recognize my divinity in that moment. There's loads of different ways in which it's happened to me. But every time it's happened to me that I felt that connectedness from when I was very, very young to now, I've always wanted to do something about it. It's never just been the case that I can have that feeling and then just let that feeling pass and think, oh, that was pretty blinding as an experience. That was, you know, exhilarating. And then I just leave it at that. I've always wanted to perform some kind of ritual, to do some kind of thing, to make some kind of gesture, to take some kind of action in order to really put that into the world and confirm it for myself in my own consciousness. You know, it's like the neon piping of the light of the awareness of divinity is inside me, but doing something about it lights up that neon piping. It gives me access to the actual words lit up as opposed to just being there. And I think that's something important too, is that I've always had these experiences that seem to go beyond what you can explain with cognition. They go beyond what you can explain with just logic. And they feel otherworldly. They feel bigger than the sum of their parts. And when I have those experiences, I have never just pushed them aside or thought of them as just random coincidences or, you know, shrugged them off as not necessarily being important. They were very important to me. I recognized them and I recognized the importance of them. And I wanted to do something to confirm that I'd had that experience and that awareness. I wanted to make it real in some sense. And to me, that's a big part of witchcraft. You know, that's where I'm coming from with it personally. Whenever I'm lost, witchcraft finds me again. It's a way for me to bring myself back home to me. And I think that's very important for whenever I've been left alone, abandoned, whenever I felt like I was drifting apart from somebody that I was very close to, whenever a relationship or friendship has ended. Those are times where it's meant a lot to me to have witchcraft. And I know that there's a lot of dialogue that happens about, you know, not just turning to witchcraft when you need it, but also practicing regularly when things are good, when things are going right for you. And I've definitely done a video or two about consistency in practice and how it can be helpful and the reasons why you might want to practice consistency in the craft, whether things are going well or not so well. That's for sure. But I also think it's important to recognize that when things are going well and you're feeling lots of positive feelings, lots of empowered feelings, and your projects are going well, your relationships are going well, you might actually... Gosh, I don't know if that picked up on the camera, but that was my stomach. Okay, fine. You need some food. I'll get you a banana in a second. When your life is going well, you might actually be witching in other ways. So, for example, you know, if you have lots of great friendships going on, lots of social events that you're going to, lots of great experiences that you're having, maybe you're taking your witchhood with you into those areas of your life rather than necessarily doing it at the altar per se. And maybe you're witching in a more spontaneous way that's less connected to certain dates or moon phases or sabbats. And maybe when you want to use witchcraft to reconnect with your potency or your joy because things are not going so well in life, that might be where you have a practice that is more scheduled and more consistent in a way that looks more consistent on paper. But what I'm trying to say basically is that I think we tell ourselves that witching is something that you do that somebody else should be able to say is witching. So if somebody walks in on you and you're at your altar and you're lighting candles or you're doing poppet magic or whatever, then somebody could stand behind you and they might know nothing about the craft, but they know that that is witchcraft that you are doing. And we often tell ourselves that that is witchcraft, you know, the stuff that is verifiable on site as being witchy. But actually, I perform witchcraft in various different ways. I perform it when I'm with my friends talking with them. I perform witchcraft when I am talking with my clients. I perform witchcraft when I'm writing poetry. I'm performing witchcraft when I'm making art. I'm definitely doing something witchy when I'm going for a walk and I'm just gathering in everything that I'm seeing, and I'm weaving my feelings and my thoughts together into a tapestry that's got some sense of understanding in it for me. I'm doing witchcraft at all kinds of different times, I think. I'm taking my witchhood with me into other places, and I'm allowing myself to witch in ways and alchemize in ways and direct power in ways that are not necessarily to do with the altar. I think if there's that desire there for consistency, that's great, and have that consistency, you know, operate within that desire for consistency. But also don't forget that the more structured witchcraft that we do when we are really in need of centering within ourselves, finding our power, having that feeling that there's something there that we can rely upon that's leading us forward, that stuff might only come into it when you're really in need of it. And then when you're not so in need of it, maybe you direct your witchhood down different avenues. Maybe it comes out and exposes itself in different kinds of ways. So maybe you're not a bad witch, you know, for only really spending a lot of time at your altar or a lot of time doing your witchy journaling or whatever when you feel crappy and when things are going wrong, because perhaps there are different ways that your witchhood expresses itself when things are going well. I know that for me, that is sometimes the case. To me, my craft is not something that I can disrespect by doing it in different ways or not doing it for a while, not operating within it for a while and then coming back to it. It's not going to be offended or insulted. It's not a friend that I'm leaving until I need something and then coming in and being like, oh, do you mind if I just, you know, and not asking it how it's doing. It's the craft. It's my craft. So it's my way and it's how I want it to be and it's how it's best for me. And I have no apology to make for that. And I think sometimes if we're feeling very guilty about the way that we are operating as witches and the way that we interact with our craft, we have to think to ourselves, am I telling myself the craft is some human being almost that is resentful if I don't turn up in a consistent manner? Because that's not the case, and it's never been the case. Your craft, your rules, your way, basically. So I think that's something that we can flog ourselves with and be angry with ourselves about when why at the end of the day. It's how we want to do it, and it's how it feels best for us. I wasn't actually expecting to mention this in this video, but as there are no notes, I guess it's going where it's going, darlings. I wanted to talk a little bit in the same vein about gatekeeping in the craft. I've noticed that there are people that say that you should not do any major workings, even in your first year of being a witch, that you should take it really slowly, you should read lots of books, you should have all of your foundational knowledge in place first before you actually start to do workings, especially workings that are considered to be more heavy hitters, like bindings and banishings and stuff like that, or even healing work. And I would like to say that I do find that to be unrealistic and a little bit gatekeepy or elitist, because actually, if you think about it, witchcraft is something that can be very helpful for people who find that their backs are against the wall and they have exhausted all of their other options. And it might be that for some witches, they only really recognize that they have the instinct to use the craft when they are really in need of it, because they've exhausted all other means of solving the problem that they need to solve. And, we talk about witchcraft being for people on the margins, and people that are dealing with different kinds of oppression or different kinds of issues that they are finding they have no other recourse for, in terms of solving them, making them better. So in that case, then it stands to reason that some of the people that come to witchcraft are going to be people who don't necessarily have everything on the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs met right now. In fact, they are witching to fill in that bottom part of the pyramid, so I think that it's very unfortunate when there is this rhetoric around witchcraft only being something that you can properly get into and really use once you've done all of this foundational learning and you've got all of your pieces in place and you understand the history of the craft and you understand different traditions and all of that stuff. It just doesn't happen like that for everybody. And I think that makes complete sense, because witchcraft can often be for the desperate. It can be for the people that are exhausted and have exhausted all their possibilities. It wasn't that way for me necessarily. It was much more of a slow burn. So I've definitely used witchcraft when I felt like I'm on the edge of the fucking night, as it were, for sure. And I'm sure I'll use it for that again. I'm sure that the energy of witch and everything it means to me is very much glowing when I'm in pain, when I'm looking for that North Star. That's witchcraft for me, no doubt. Witchcraft is also something I bring to my most joyful times, my most empowered times, my most successful times, my most sexy times. It's there all the time. Is it something I reach for when I'm broken and desperate and scared? 100%. But yeah, I did have witchcraft as play, and I did read about the craft, and I did, I did sort of go into it in more the way that I suppose is approved, I didn't hurtle into it in my 20s needing to do a banishing and being like, how do I do a banishing? Somebody in a Facebook group tell me how to do a banishing. I didn't come into it that way. However, I can understand why people come into it that way. And it makes sense to me that might be a way that you would discover that you are a potent witch, is because you have a deep need for something to solve an issue. And you start to recognize within yourself that actually maybe I've got the power and the will and the urgency to be able to do something myself in some sense, So I think that's also something worth thinking about, is like, where are we gatekeeping in a way that it doesn't make sense? I mean, does any gatekeeping make sense? I suppose, I guess in some ways it does, but the term gatekeeping, obviously, it's about hierarchy, it's about elitism, it's about you're allowed in here and you're not, by virtue of whatever variables. And I think the idea that somebody comes to the craft in a kind of break glass in case of emergency way, the idea that someone would come to the craft like that and that invalidates their witchhood, or that means they can't be a part of it, is just silliness. What is witchcraft for if it's not to solve our problems? And if we have the deep instinct that we're a witch because we suddenly have a very seemingly insurmountable problem, then doesn't that kind of make sense? One of the things that I think brought me back to the craft after one of my breaks was the desire to satisfy my own curiosity, really. To see what was possible and to investigate some of the deep feelings I'd had earlier in my life, that witchcraft was valid and powerful and exciting and led me to some really awesome core parts of my being. I think that I had to go back to find out if that was true. And I work with a lot of witches in my work as a spiritual counsellor and a reader. I work with a lot of witches who do struggle with extreme self-surveillance. They feel silly for wanting to do witchcraft or ritual. They feel like they're observing themselves doing it, and they feel foolish doing it. And they feel like that takes something away from the experience for them. And they also feel like they couldn't really explain quite why the things they're doing are worthwhile, or how they might possibly work. And that adds to that feeling that they're being silly and they're doing something that isn't valid. You know, quite often they will start to plan a spell or a ritual, for example, and they will start thinking, you know what, I could not write an essay to explain why I'm exactly doing this and why I think it's going to work, you know. So that sort of makes me feel invalid in doing it. And that could be for all kinds of reasons. It could be because of their upbringing. It could be because of messages that they have experienced in society. It could be because they have a non-supportive partner who thinks witchcraft is ridiculous. It could be because they work in an academic setting where witchcraft is frowned upon or thought of to be silly or whatever. Maybe they think it contradicts who they are in that professional or academic setting. There's loads of reasons why they might feel that they can't explore the craft. And what I always say, or we always end up having some sort of conversation along these lines anyway, is, you know, let's say that your evidence gathering is just in terms of, does this work for me or not? You know, you're not trying to answer the bigger question of what is witchcraft? Is witchcraft real? What exactly is happening? Because I don't think we can answer those questions. But I think, can we answer the question of whether or not it personally enriches our lives if we do it? Yes, we can answer that question, but only if we do it. We can't sit on the sidelines and try and guess and think, maybe it would work, maybe it wouldn't, maybe it would make me feel better, maybe it wouldn't, maybe I would be able to go forward and do these scary things that I've been wanting to do, or maybe I wouldn't. You know, what's the point in sitting on the sidelines wondering when we could just start doing rituals and spells and actually see if it works, you know? So it's gathering our own body of evidence to find out whether or not witchcraft would have any discernible effect on us as individuals. And for me, that's what matters, you know, trying to answer the bigger questions, the more overriding questions about witchcraft as a whole, witchcraft in terms of humanity. I'm not really interested in doing that because I don't think I'm going to be able to do that in my lifetime. But I am interested in seeing, how does this affect me? Does it affect me positively? Is it making me feel like a better class of person when I do it? Am I feeling like I'm being a higher and better version of myself? Am I making better choices? Do I feel, you know, less negative things and more positive or empowered things along the way? And the answer to those questions is yes. You know, I feel better when witchcraft is a part of my reality. So it was really wanting to satisfy that deep curiosity. And I think the final time I satisfied that curiosity, I had been through so much shit. I had been in so much pain. I'd gone through really, truly a harrowing breakup, like, ouch. Really harrowing. And I can still viscerally put myself back there when I recount it or when I explain it to somebody. And I've been through all of this mental health stuff. I'd really been so ill. My life had been delayed and put on hold in my earlier years, my late teens especially, and early 20s, by these really, really difficult mental health issues, scary mental health issues that I was having. And that final time that I proved to myself that witchcraft was fucking medicinal, alchemical, deeply transpersonally effective for me, that was all the proof I needed. And I never looked back after that. I kept the word witch, and I kind of I wrote it through me like a stick of rock. You know, I realized that, you know what, that's all the proof I need. I'll keep this now. Coming back to the craft and actually remaining with the craft and remaining with that part of my identity led me to recognize that I wanted it to be as powerful as possible. And for me, that meant making it as individual as possible and as personalized as possible. I wanted it customized. I wanted it tailored to my needs. And I wanted it to really be punctuated by my story. Everything that gives me joy and makes me feel completely fizzy and bubbly and excited about life. Everything that has always meant something to me from even the earliest memories that I have. And I've really been going on that journey to make sure that my craft is studied and embellished all the time with the things that really give me what I need to make a meal of it, to make it really significant, to make it truly alchemical. And I think that's a lot of what I've talked about on my channel, obviously, ever since I started speaking about the craft in a public way, it has been at least partly to encourage others to do the same. And year on year, I feel like that's been something that I've tried to pass on, is just, if you have certain films or books or video games or locations or words or poems or whatever it might be that you feel are really potent for you and they do something to you, they shift your perspective, they give you access to feelings of power, they help you to get shit done. That is witchy stuff. Put that in your practice. Don't leave that outside of the circle. And throw away anything that you've been trying to conform to or you've been trying to include that actually makes you feel kind of lackluster. It's kind of dull. You don't really get that much from it. I think that sacred permission to go on that journey that is truly eclectic and truly reflects you can give you the keys to power in a much greater way. I have discovered what's important to me over the course of time through witchcraft by thinking to myself, okay, how do I really connect with the feeling of power or with the feeling of protection or with the, whatever it might be? Where is that for me in my experiences, in the influences that I enjoy, in the music that I listen to, in the clothing that I wear? And that has led me to understand more about myself. And it's led me to remember things about my past that I had forgotten. When I wanted to do a protection spell once years ago, and I was thinking, what really represents protection to me? Where have I felt protected for the longest time? Where have I felt like everything was going to be okay? And it led me to my connection to Aslan from the Narnia Chronicles. And it gave me all of these really interesting memories of when I was really young. And I first started becoming obsessed with Narnia and Cair Paravel and the whole story. And I thought to myself, wow, that's really significant. That attaches to so many things I'd forgotten about and so many, sort of deep feelings that I had about the world and about parenthood and about what it means to be safe and what it means to be encouraged and, what the word paternal even means. Or it was just really interesting. And it took me down a deep road of self-discovery. It was a rabbit hole of selfhood that I only encountered because I was trying to think about how I could design the most potent possible protection spell. In my book, Rebel Witch, Carve the Craft That's Yours Alone, I write in one of the opening chapters, the things you can learn about yourself as a witch are endless. I've discovered so much about my interests and tastes, my spiritual skills, my emotions, my fears and insecurities, and how to deal with them. My spiritual path has given me insights into how my past has affected me and what to release from my life or welcome into it. Witchcraft has been a part of my healing journey. If you want to delve deeply into your inner workings, being a witch can give you many opportunities to do so. And I think it's partly about trying to figure out what would really make this spell pop, what would take this ritual to the next level, what would make this devotional double fucking naughty, where I really, really got to the bone of it. And it was really about me and about the deepest parts of me and about the power that I want to conjure up inside of me and I want to connect with. And when you ask yourself those kinds of questions, the answers that come through are riveting and they change your perception of what you've been through, where you're going, what your deepest needs are, what you are capable of and what you have access to within yourself. So it is a very potent, very beautiful journey to go on, and long may I continue on with it. I know that this is a journey that's going to last me the rest of my life long. I would really love to know what your perceptions have been as you've been listening to this video. What is your journey as a witch all about? What does it give to you? How do you access witchhood? What does the word witch mean to you? And if you're watching this and you haven't owned the word witch, maybe you want to, maybe you don't own it, but you're interested in witchy content for whatever reason, don't be afraid. Rock up in the comments and also let us know, what is it for you that is interesting to you about witchhood, and why do you find it to be a topic that you want to invest in and engage in, because I think that's also really interesting. I'm going to go now and get in the shower and take myself off to London to look at some art and have some drinks and enjoy myself. So thank you so much for just coming and sitting with me while I have my coffee and just absorb these witchy morning vibes. So much love to you, darlings, and blessed be. Mwah.